Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Thanks for joining me once again today. Pardon my absence yesterday. I was trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Occasionally I need a break in order to do that because I only like to make videos like this when I feel like I have something unique to contribute to the conversation and I'm not just reading the news to you guys. So let's see what I came up with. Now the title, I know it sounds a little sensational, but it's 100% true. The United States is sending some upgraded nuclear weapons systems fast-tracked to Europe, namely the UK, by December. This wasn't supposed to happen until next year, but it's being expedited for a variety of reasons that we're going to talk about, and it doesn't look good, to say the least. So they're fast-tracking the delivery of B-6112 nuclear bombs to Europe by December. These are dial-a-yield, satellite-guided gravity bombs that can range from 0.3 kilotons, which is relatively small, but still a very large explosion, to a whopping, I think it's like 300 kilotons. So this is still considered tactical, believe it or not. Obviously, tactical is very subjective. Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. These bombs can go all the way up to 300 kilotons, but down to 0.3 kilotons. Now, this is so significant because this coincides with the loosening of the U.S. nuclear doctrine. The United States Department of Defense came out with their nuclear posture report a few days ago, an 80-page document, which basically altered their nuclear doctrine and their first use policy. Before, it was such that the United States would not initiate a first strike on a nuclear or non-nuclear country, and that they had this no first use policy. Well, that now is basically out the window, and they're saying that this is the result of the range of non-nuclear capabilities of the adversary, likely in the form of electromagnetic pulse and dirty bombs, if you will, and probably a variety of other cyber security related stuff. So they're not ruling out the preemptive use of nuclear weapons. Now, this coincides with the fact that Britain, if you didn't know, is on the brink of war with Russia, because according to some allegations that were made by the Russians, if they turn out to be correct, then I think it's only a matter of time before we see a kinetic exchange between Russia and Britain. And we all know what that means. That means World War III. Now, consider that the Russians are making the allegation that it was in fact the British Navy that not only orchestrated and coordinated, but actually perpetrated the attacks on Nord Stream. The Nord Stream pipeline, one of the biggest infrastructural projects outside of Russia, probably the biggest. And also that they were complicit, possibly the MI6, in the bombing of the Crimean Bridge. Now understand what that is. I don't know what the equivalent would be if that were to happen here, but it's far more, with the exception of the amount of people that died in, the trade towers, the World Trade Center attacks. This is on that level because you need to understand that a country attacking a nation's critical infrastructure like that is essentially a declaration of war. It's no longer a proxy conflict that's taking place on the battleground of Ukraine. It's an act of war, and if the Russians choose to view it that way, then all of this nuclear posturing with the exercises that are ongoing, the bomb shelter provisioning that Moscow is currently undertaking across the country. We're seeing this happen in many countries across Europe where they're literally getting ready. I mean, you even have Liz Truss, the story just came out today, that says that she was obsessed with weather reports in her final days as prime minister, fearing that Putin would do a nuke test that could send radiation to the UK. Now, I'm sure that story, which is being parroted by many news sources today, is slightly blown out of proportion. She probably said something about nuclear radiation in passing, and then they blew it up to, mean her obsessing about it. Regardless, we know that there's all these maneuvers happening in many countries across Europe that indicate that they're preparing for a nuclear confrontation. And you even have the chief of the British Army, recall Patrick Sanders, just a few months ago, the newly anointed chief had told his troops that they must prepare to fight in Europe. Once again, that they need to prepare to part ways with their family members in order to fight the Russians. and that there was a burning imperative to forge an army capable of fighting alongside our allies and defeat Russia in battle. So I don't even know how the UK, if the Russians are 100% confident in their intelligence, which I presume they would be, otherwise I don't think they would really make that public unless they're trying to misdirect in some way, then I don't see how Britain is still on the map, to be brutally honest. I mean, there's going to be some retaliation towards the Brits as a result of this. Recall, Boris Johnson was one of the first guys to go to Ukraine when the war started to die down in Kiev earlier in the year. And so clearly they're incredibly hawkish, and they have a lot of vested interest in seeing the Russians not succeed in their imperatives in Ukraine for some reason. So you just have this interesting coinciding of events with the nukes being fast-tracked, the more accurate nuclear weapons. Of course, yes, there are a lot of nukes already in Europe, but these are going to be more accurate ones. And it's just, all this stuff is happening. This cannot be a coincidence, okay? I mean, it could be, but you know, we need to understand that there's all these different tiers of information, and the information that you and I are most accustomed to is, you know, the public, what's in available open source intel, as they call it, which is available for public consumption. And some of it is more sophisticated than others. Then, of course, there is the classified information that only intelligence agencies know. Then I guess there's another tier, which is the things that intelligence agencies disseminate, which is probably usually just done to misdirect or to control the situation in some way, shape, or form, and isn't truly meant to inform. So we know that Liz Truss had her email hacked in the last few months by Kremlin hackers. Now, if it's known that Liz Truss had her emails hacked, imagine how many other people within the governments are hacked. I mean, apparently the Kremlin hackers are reported to have gained access to negotiations with international allies about arms shipments to Ukraine, as well as Ms. Truss' personal messages to key ally Kwarteng. So imagine what the Russians actually know, what they're not saying. Now, they're not going to let on everything they know, because you want to keep that element of surprise. Just because you know your enemy is going to attack in a certain place doesn't mean that you are going to call them on it in hopes that they call off the offensive. In fact, you may feign ignorance and decide to lure them in, make them feel overconfident, and then, come in and flank them or something like that. Just to give an example. So it's always important to understand that what we're hearing and what we're seeing, probably both the Russians and the US intelligence have these deep, long tentacles that extend well into the other side, and that there is an information war being waged on a level of which we have no comprehension, okay? So all we can really do to understand what is happening is look at military maneuvers. Why is the 101st Airborne on the border with Ukraine? There's a reason for that. Why are they fast-tracking the tactical nuclear weapons to the more advanced tactical nuclear weapons, namely to the UK, by December? Okay, why is Poland and a variety of other countries fast-tracking the inventorying of their bunker systems? Why is Moscow taking inventory and provisioning their bunkers in schools, in hospitals? Just all of these data points with respect to the public awareness campaigns about radiological events and encouraging populations to get radiation medication, and the government stockpiling radiation medication and personal protective equipment and all the rest, all points to something as big as coming. Hopefully this spy game, this James Bond stuff that's going on behind the scenes that we're unaware of, hopefully the war is sorted out on that level, so it doesn't have to be sorted out in a kinetic sense. But that attack, if it was found, and it cannot be, I don't want to beleaguer this point, but if it was discovered that the UK was actually the perpetrators of the Nord Stream attack and the Crimean Bridge attack, then, I mean, it's only a matter of time before the UK and Russia goes to war, which means there's only a matter of time before we go to war, especially Canada, because, I mean, we're conjoined with Britain and the United States at the hip. So we're going to war if they go to war. On the topic of spying, recall that SolarWinds hack wasn't too long ago, back in 2020, where hackers, they're thinking that they were Kremlin-based hackers, although it's impossible to know with 100% certainty, but it was definitely a nation-state level hack, so it could be either the Russians or the Chinese, but that they got access to 18,000 government and non-government organizations, that their backdoors into all of their programs that still to this day pose a threat. There's still latent malware or just cybersecurity threats on these systems. Okay, so God only knows, what is known at that level. I mean, why is it that Ben Wallace has to fly to the Pentagon in a rush to speak with Lloyd Austin? Well, it's probably because they know that all of their communication lines are tapped or hacked in some way, shape, or form. I mean, you have the CIA director going to Kiev just days after that allegation was made by Sergei Shoigu that the Ukrainians were planning to do a dirty bomb, and he was calling all of the defense ministers of all the NATO countries and India and China to warn them of this and put it out there, make it publicly known, in perhaps an attempt to thwart what he thought was going to, or what they thought was going to be a false flag. And then 2 days later, the CIA director is in Kiev. Now, he wasn't there in Kiev since the beginning of the conflict. February 24th, I believe, was the last day that William Burns was there. And Shoigu and Lloyd Austin hadn't communicated since the beginning of the war also, I believe, or maybe there was one time afterwards. But those two data points in and of itself are very interesting. Why is the head of the CIA suddenly flying to Ukraine and saying, like, what is he saying, right? Is he saying, hey, if you guys are planning something, put the brakes on it? Or was there something else? Or, like I say, we don't know what's going on that level. I mean, for all we know, it's a completely different world up there of information warfare. So this is just something important that we think we know what's going on, but we always have to humble ourselves to the fact that up the chain of command, they're a lot more privy to classified information, both sides, and both sides have very sophisticated intelligence apparati, I should say. Now, with respect to what's going on in the war zone, Kherson, apparently the Russians are digging in pretty deep. Now, according to Al Jazeera, Zelensky is starting to suspect that the Russians are just doing this theatrical creation of panic, trying to pretend like they're a little bit weaker in Kherson than they in fact are when they're doing the exact opposite. I'm not sure if you guys are keeping up with this information, but Surovkin, the General Armageddon, came on the news and he said, we're going to have to make some hard decisions. We might have to retreat from this area, or at least that was the implication, making it look like the Russians weren't ready for a Ukrainian offensive, almost inviting them in to throw everything they have at this offensive so that the Russians could destroy them. Well, then you notice that the Ukrainians started moving their attention towards Bakhmut once again. And I don't want to get into the minutiae of the battlefield because I'm not just on that level to comment on that kind of stuff. But you need to understand that that's the level that's being played right now. This is chess. It's not checkers. It's not just, Ukrainians were planning all summer to attack the south and that's what they did in this linear, one-dimensional thing. No. There's so much more to the picture that we're just not privy to. Now, we know that the grain deal has been suspended. That is a big blow to Europe, namely, because apparently 60 to 100%, they're saying, the Russians are saying, of the ships went to Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands. Now, from there, did they go to other impoverished nations? The Russians are saying, no, they didn't. And you need to understand, guys, what the Russians are trying to do. Vladimir Putin gave a speech the other day, and they're seeing the opportunity to lead the G180, okay? Because you need to understand there's the G20, which is us. We're District 1 of the Hunger Games, District 1 and 2, that's us. And there's a G180, that's the rest of the districts that are pissed off. And they want to revolt, and they want a Katniss Everdeen. I guess Putin is trying to be Katniss Everdeen. Although you'd think it would be Zelensky in that role because of the green screen and stuff like that. And, you know, go back and watch the Hunger Games, guys. You're going to notice some very scary parallels to how this conflict is playing out with that in terms of the propaganda campaigns that they run. Anyways, that's what Putin is trying to do. He's trying to seize on the discontent of these 180 nations who feel like they are exploited and taken advantage of and kept under the boot heels of Western hegemony, and they're trying to seize on that and get their support because they know, and rightly so, that those countries are the future. Those are the countries with the biggest growing populations, which are going to be huge consumers of energy in the future. And so the Russians and the Chinese with the Belt and Road Initiative are trying to position themselves to be the next globalists. So there is a war right now between nationalism and globalism, but I would caution people against, you know, being very rah-rah nationalism because, of course, historically we know that has its drawbacks as well. Now, I'm not saying that globalism and multinational business interests should trump domestic interests, and that there is definitely something to be said for, you know, the reasons why people like Trump and Putin and other people who are putting their own countrymen first, so to speak, everything in quotes. There's something to be said for that. However, it can go a little bit too far in that direction as well, and it can be very dangerous. So, you know, that's why I'm going to be the guy. I don't care if I die on the fence. You know, I'd rather die on the fence. I have a good view of things. Anyway, that Hunger Game metaphor, that's something for you guys to think about, because remember in that movie, Katniss Everdeen is having a conversation with the dictator Snow towards the end. And sorry, this is not really a spoiler, but I guess it kind of is. But he basically tells her that the other district they actually created a false flag in the movie in order to get into power. And that's when Katniss realized that the revolutionaries who were going to take over were just as bad as the despots that they were trying to overthrow. In fact, they were worse because they were willing to sacrifice some of their most vulnerable. So what I'm trying to say here is that I know there's a lot of Russia bros and people who are rightly so acknowledging the grievances of that side, but understand that at the end of the day, somebody's going to want to rule the world. It's going to be the United States, or it's going to be the Russians and the Chinese. And some people might believe that because of all the corruption that's so deeply embedded in our deep state, if you will, that, yeah, maybe it's time for a change. In those 180 countries, anything is better. Like, any change is better for them. Something to keep in mind, though, is that perhaps, you know, once those countries assume the role of the new hegemons of the world, then it might be worse than what we have now. In fact, a lot of people, of course, if they're, you know, towing the mainstream line, will say, of course it will be worse. You know, it'll be an authoritarian, autocratic regime where we're all under the social credit system and yada, yada, yada. Anyways, just some information for you. Britain and Russia are ready to go to war. I think it's only a matter of time before there's consequences for this. Red lines have definitely been crossed. If there ever was one, it's targeting your nation's biggest piece of critical infrastructure. I mean, that's on the level of the World Trade Center towers minus the people. I mean, in terms of the actual financial implications, it's way bigger than hitting the towers. So I don't see how Russia is going to be able to let that slide. And just sort of, they're not going to be able to let it slide. We also have lots of other stories. There's a record wheat drought in the United States, and I'm running out of time here. Only got a minute left because I did not plan this. I did not delete enough files off my phone. We also have Foxconn employees who are locked down, 200,000 people on lockdown in these Apple factories fighting over food. Okay, and this is why, you know, China has been biding its time. They've been allowing its people to be exploited by American companies. And I think the tide is about to change on that. And this is, I think, probably, you know, one of the last vestiges of the American empire, and this stuff going on in China. For some reason, the Chinese don't want to do the mRNA thing. I don't know why. Maybe they know something that we don't. Who knows? I'm sure I probably didn't cover everything here. There's a lot more information. I got a stack of news this big. But you guys let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Check out CanadianPreparedness.com. Thanks for watching.